Hey guys, welcome back to another video. This is Eric from eGetSec. As promised, I'm going to be doing a PUBG comparison between the Redmi K40 Gaming Edition and the Poco F3. So let's find out which of these two phones will run PUBG better. So what are we waiting for, guys? Let's get this comparison started. The Redmi K40 Game Enhanced Bruce Lee Edition has the MediaTek Dimensity 1200 chip, while the Poco F3 has the Snapdragon 870. In terms of RAM and storage, I've got the Redmi K40 here with 12256, while the Poco F3 is only the 6GB and 128 storage version. So for this gaming test, I'm going to be using the Chinese version of PUBG or Game for Peace, and of course I'm going to be using Game Turbo. Alright guys, so the game is loaded. Let's go ahead and see the settings. So it's all in Chinese, but you can definitely see here, I've got 90 frames per second enabled for the MediaTek Dimensity 1200. So let's see how this K40 Game Enhanced Edition performs in PUBG at 90 frames per second. Alright guys, so let's measure some temps. .9 top, 41.5 middle, and 40 at the bottom. Now at the back, 42.5, 38.9, and 37.4. So it looks like this Redmi K40 Game Enhanced Edition can handle PUBG at 90 frames per second just fine, but we'll look at the graphs later on and see how well it did. So I'll go ahead and let the phone cool down, and then I'll test out the Poco F3. And of course I'm going to be running as well the Chinese version just to keep things fair, and I'm going to be using Game Turbo. Okay, I've got Game for Peace running, and let's see if I can enable 90 frames per second. So unfortunately guys, for the Poco F3 with the Snapdragon 870, there is no 90 frames per second option. So it hasn't yet been enabled for the game, and unfortunately as well for the global PUBG version, it also didn't have that 90 frames per second. So I'm just going to be testing it at this setting, so I'm just going to make the changes realistic and do the same for the lobby, and there you go. So let me launch a game now. So for the Poco F3 doesn't have the shoulder buttons, so I've gotten used to playing PUBG with the shoulder buttons, so I'm probably going to be doing a bit of adjustment here guys. Alright guys, game is done. Let's measure some temps. 41.4, 38.6, and 37.9. And at the back, 39.8, 36.4, and 35. So overall, temperatures weren't too bad on the Poco F3 with the Snapdragon 870, partly because it's only running at 60 frames per second. If the 90 frames per second option was already available, then it might be a different story. So right now, it's not a very accurate or a very fair comparison between the Redmi K40 Game Edition and the Poco F3 because of that missing 90 frames per second. So right now, there is no point in actually running the test again with a cooler on the Poco F3 because I didn't see any kind of thermal throttling at all on this phone. But with the Redmi K40, I did notice that the frames dipped to around 85 from 90 frames per second after around the 15-minute mark. So that tells me that there is a bit of thermal throttling happening on this phone. So I'm going to be doing one final test. I'm going to be attaching the Phone Cooler Pro 2 on the Redmi K40 Game Edition and we'll see if I can keep that consistent 90 frames per second. Alright guys, cooler is here and I'm going to be removing the bumper case because the cooler won't work very well with the bumper case on the Redmi K40. Okay, bumper case is out and let me attach the cooler. The cooler can't be placed exactly in the middle because it's going to be hitting that big power button that serves as your fingerprint scanner. Starting another game guys. Alright guys, test is done. Let's measure some temps. 36, 31.6, and 32.2. So let's remove the cooler and measure the temps at the back. 34.3, 19.9, that's pretty low guys. Yeah, 29.5. So it's pretty clear here guys that the MediaTek Dimensity 1200 is a very powerful chip, and with the use of the Phone Cooler Pro 2, you can keep temperatures down and maximize the performance. So it's a shame guys that the 90 frames per second option isn't enabled yet on the Poco F3, otherwise it would have been more of a fair test because right now the 90 frames per second is making the Redmi K40 Game Enhanced Edition a much better option if you're going to be playing PUBG. And I never thought that I'm going to be missing the shoulder buttons on the Redmi K40 Game Enhanced Edition. Playing PUBG without these shoulder buttons is a different experience, and since I'm not a pro gamer and play PUBG every day, these shoulder buttons really help out in playing first person shooters like PUBG and Call of Duty. So before we wrap up this test, here are the results that I got for the average frames per second for each phone. So for the test without the coolers on the K40 Game Enhanced Edition, I got an average frames per second of 86, which isn't too bad guys. And for the Poco F3, it's 59.8, so that's almost a consistent 60 frames per second on the Snapdragon 870, which has really impressed me guys. Now with the addition of the Phone Cooler Pro 2, because I did notice that there was a bit of thermal throttling happening on the Redmi K40 Game Enhanced Edition, the average frames per second actually went up to 88.1. So that's just 1.9 frames per second off of 90, which tells me that this phone is very well capable of handling 90 frames per second as long as you keep the temperatures down. In terms of the CPU temperature, the Redmi K40 without the cooler hit 48.2 degrees Celsius, while the Poco F3 with the Snapdragon 870 hit 51.2. So the Qualcomm Snapdragon chip is consistently hitting higher temperatures, but it doesn't affect the performance at all guys. Now adding the Phone Cooler Pro 2, the temperature of the CPU on the K40 MediaTek Dimensity 1200 is only 41.5. And for those who might say that it's not a fair comparison because I've got 12GB of RAM on the Redmi K40 Game Enhanced Edition and only 6GB on the Poco F3, here are the results of the memory usage while playing the game. Both phones actually only used around 1.1 to 1.2 GB of RAM during playtime. So having less RAM doesn't make a difference because it's only going to allow you to store more apps in the memory. PUBG doesn't use too much memory and only really needs around 1.1 to 1.2, as we can see from these results. But here is where the Snapdragon 870 actually fares a lot better than the Redmi K40. The Snapdragon 870 only used around 3.3 watts of power during that gaming session, while the MediaTek Dimensity 1200 on the Redmi K40 Game Enhanced Edition used a consistent 4.3 watts with and without the cooler. So I guess that's it for this quick PUBG comparison, guys. And in terms of actual touch latency, I did notice that the Redmi K40 was a lot more responsive during game time because I actually hit the trigger button a couple of times accidentally because it's so sensitive. If I'm going to be playing a lot of first-person shooters, I'm going to be picking the Redmi K40 Gaming because of the shoulder buttons as well as the better touch latency over the Poco F3. So I guess that's it for my comparison between the Redmi K40 Gaming and the Poco F3 in PUBG, and I'm most probably going to be repeating this test once the 90 frames per second option has been enabled on the Snapdragon 870. But for now, please take these results as my own. You may be getting different results on your devices, so let me know in the comment section down below and we can discuss it further. But until then, a sub would be massively appreciated. Please like and subscribe, hit that bell icon notification, and see you all on my next one.